In a quiet, unassuming town surrounded by thick forests and winding roads, Lieutenant Sarah Callahan stood out like a sore thumb. She wasn't from around here, not anymore, at least. After years of serving in the military as a highly skilled K-9 handler, she had returned to her hometown for some much-needed rest. Her two loyal companions, Titan, a sleek, powerful German shepherd, and Blaze, a sharp, agile Belgian Malinois, were never far behind her. Together, they had faced danger on foreign soil, saved lives, and formed bonds stronger than steel. But here, back in this sleepy little town, Sarah quickly realized that not everyone appreciated what she did or who she was. The town itself was picturesque, with its quaint shops, friendly neighbors, and slow pace of life. However, beneath the surface lay a group of people who thrived on chaos. The Iron Reapers, a rowdy biker gang notorious for their loud bikes, rough behavior, and disdain for anyone who didn't fit their mold of toughness. To them, Sarah was an easy target. Not only was she a woman in a field dominated by men, but she also worked with dogs instead of guns or brute force. In their eyes, that made her weak. And weakness, that was something the Iron Reapers couldn't stand. Sarah tried to keep to herself, focusing on reconnecting with nature and giving Titan and Blaze the downtime they deserved after so many intense missions. Every morning, she'd take long walks through the forest trails, letting her dogs run free and stretch their legs. Sometimes, she practiced basic commands or set up makeshift training exercises just to keep their skills sharp. It was during one of these sessions near the edge of town that she first encountered the Iron Reapers. They were gathered outside their usual haunt, an old crumbling gas station that now served as their clubhouse, when they noticed Sarah working with her dogs. At first, it started with snickers, a few mocking comments about how cute her dogs looked running around. Then came louder jeers, questioning whether those animals could actually do anything useful. Razor, the self-proclaimed leader of the gang, stepped forward, his leather jacket creaking as he crossed his arms over his chest. His voice carried across the distance, dripping with sarcasm. "Hey, lady, you think those mutts can handle real trouble, or are they just good for fetch?" Sarah ignored him, keeping her focus on Titan and Blaze. But inside, her jaw tightened. She knew better than to engage with bullies, especially ones like Razor, who seemed to thrive on tearing others down. Still, the words stung. These dogs weren't just pets. They were partners, warriors, and family. They had risked their lives alongside her countless times. Hearing them dismissed so casually felt wrong. As the days passed, the bikers continued to mock her whenever they saw her. Some even followed her during her walks, shouting insults and revving their engines to startle the dogs. Each time, Sarah remained calm, refusing to let their taunts get under her skin. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wouldn't end quietly. Something was brewing, something bigger than simple ridicule. And while Sarah wasn't looking for a fight, she knew she might have to face one sooner rather than later. On a crisp autumn afternoon, the air carried the faint scent of pine and fallen leaves. Sarah decided it was time to give Titan and Blaze a proper workout. She loaded her truck with training gear, hurdles, tunnels, and dummy targets, and drove to an open field just outside town. The location was perfect, secluded yet accessible, with enough space for her dogs to run freely and practice their advanced maneuvers. Little did she know, this peaceful spot would soon become the stage for an unexpected confrontation. As Sarah began setting up the obstacle course, her movements were deliberate and efficient. Years of military training had taught her to prepare quickly and thoroughly, no matter the circumstances. Titan and Blaze watched intently, their tails wagging in anticipation. Once everything was ready, Sarah stepped back and gave the command. "Go," she called out, her voice firm but calm. Instantly, the dogs sprang into action, weaving through poles, leaping over hurdles, and darting through tunnels with breathtaking speed and precision. Their teamwork was flawless, a testament to years of trust and discipline. Unbeknownst to Sarah, They weren't alone. A group of bikers from the Iron Reapers had been lounging at their clubhouse nearby when they heard the commotion. Curiosity got the better of them, and soon, Razor led his crew toward the source of the noise. When they arrived, they found themselves watching something they hadn't expected. A woman commanding two highly skilled dogs with authority and ease. At first, they were silent, taken aback by the display of coordination and skill. But that didn't last long. Razor broke the silence with a sneer. Well, look what we got here," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. His words drew the attention of his fellow bikers, who quickly joined in, laughing and jeering. One of them shouted, "What's the point of all this? You teaching your dogs to fetch sticks next?" Another chimed in, "Yeah, maybe they can roll over for us too." Sarah tried to ignore them, focusing instead on her dogs. She knew better than to let distractions disrupt their training. But the bikers weren't content to simply observe. They moved closer, circling the field like predators, sizing up their prey. Razor stepped forward, his boots crunching against the dry grass. "You really think those dogs are tough? Show us what they're made of, soldier girl." His challenge hung in the air, heavy and loaded with arrogance. Sarah paused, her hands resting lightly on her hips as she turned to face him. Her expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "They don't need to prove anything to you," she replied evenly. Her voice carried a quiet strength that momentarily silenced the bikers. For a brief moment, even Razor seemed unsure of how to respond. But then his smirk returned, wider and more mocking than before. "Oh, come on," he said, spreading his arms dramatically. "Don't tell me you're scared. Unless, of course, you know they can't handle it." His words were met with cheers and laughter from his crew, egging him on. He pointed at Titan and Blaze, who stood alert beside Sarah, their ears perked and bodies tense. "Let's see if these warriors of yours can take down a real threat, or are they just show dogs?" The tension in the air was palpable. Sarah glanced at her dogs, who were now focused entirely on her, waiting for her next command. She could feel the weight of the bikers' stares, their jeers growing louder and more aggressive. Part of her wanted to walk away, to avoid giving them the satisfaction of seeing her react. But another part, a deeper, fiercer part, knew she couldn't back down. This wasn't just about her pride. It was about standing up for the bond she shared with Titan and Blaze, and proving that their abilities were far beyond what anyone in this town could comprehend. With a deep breath, Sarah straightened her posture and locked eyes with Razor. "Fine," she said, her voice steady and resolute. "If you want a demonstration, you'll get one. But don't say I didn't warn you." Her words sent a ripple through the crowd. Some of the bikers exchanged uneasy glances, while others laughed it off, convinced they had nothing to fear. Razor, however, leaned in, his grin widening. "We'll see about that," he shot back, clearly relishing the idea of putting Sarah in her place. Little did he know, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Sarah returned to her cabin with Titan and Blaze trotting faithfully at her side. The encounter with the Iron Reapers lingered heavily on her mind, replaying itself over and over like a broken record. Razor's mocking laughter echoed in her thoughts, his sneering words cutting deeper than she cared to admit. She had faced danger before, gunfire, ambushes, life-or-death situations. But this felt different. This wasn't just about survival, it was personal. Inside the cozy cabin, Sarah lit a small fire in the hearth, its warmth slowly spreading through the room. Titan stretched out near the fireplace, while Blaze settled close by, resting his head on his paws. Both dogs seemed to sense their handler's unease, their usual playful energy replaced with quiet attentiveness. Sarah sank into an old armchair, staring into the flickering flames. Her fingers absently traced the edge of a faded scar on her forearm, a reminder of past battles fought and won. Her thoughts drifted back to her time in the military, the countless missions where Titan and Blaze had been her lifeline. They weren't just tools or assets, they were partners who had saved her more times than she could count. Together, they had faced enemies far more dangerous than a gang of bikers. Yet something about today gnawed at her. It wasn't fear. It was doubt. Doubt that maybe, just maybe, Razor's taunts carried a kernel of truth. Had she grown soft? Was she out of place here, trying to live a quiet life after years of chaos? As the fire crackled softly, Sarah shook her head, dismissing the negative thoughts. No, she reminded herself. She hadn't come home to be bullied or belittled. She'd come here to heal, to reconnect with the simple joys of life. And if standing up to the Iron Reapers meant proving not only to them, but also to herself that she still had what it took, then so be it. Her resolve hardened with each passing moment. If Razor wanted a demonstration of what Titan and Blaze were capable of, he would get one. But it wouldn't just be for him. It would be for every person who ever underestimated her, for every challenge she had overcome, and most importantly, for the bond she shared with her dogs. The next morning, Sarah woke early, determined to prepare. She stepped outside as dawn broke, the world bathed in golden light. Titan and Blaze greeted her enthusiastically, sensing her renewed energy. Today wasn't just another training session. It was a mission. She set up makeshift obstacles around the yard, practicing drills that pushed both her and her dogs to their limits. Commands rang out sharply. Halt. Advance. Cover. Each word was precise, each movement synchronized. The dogs responded flawlessly, their loyalty and discipline shining brighter than ever. Word of Razor's challenge spread quickly through the town. By mid-morning, curious neighbors began stopping by, eager to catch a glimpse of the woman who dared to stand up to the Iron Reapers. Some offered words of encouragement, while others whispered bets among themselves, skeptical of whether Sarah could actually hold her own. Despite the attention, Sarah remained focused. She didn't care about the gossip or the odds stacked against her. All that mattered was showing Razor and his crew exactly what they were dealing with. That night, as Sarah sat once again by the fire with her dogs, she allowed herself a small smile. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, she felt ready. Ready to silence the doubters, ready to defend her honor, and above all, ready to remind everyone, including herself, that strength isn't measured by how loudly you shout or how big your bike is. True strength lies in resilience, trust, and the unbreakable bond between a handler and her dogs. And when the time came, Sarah knew Titan and Blaze would rise to the occasion, proving without a shadow of a doubt that they were anything but ordinary. The news of Sarah's impending showdown with the Iron Reapers spread like wildfire through the small town. By midday, everyone seemed to know about it. Shopkeepers paused their work to discuss it. Kids whispered excitedly on playgrounds, and even the usually reserved librarian couldn't help but ask Sarah about it when she stopped by to borrow a book. The challenge had become more than just a personal clash between Sarah and Razor. It was now an event that brought the entire community together, sparking curiosity and debate. For Sarah, the pressure mounted. She spent every waking moment preparing for the confrontation, knowing full well that Razor wouldn't make it easy. The bikers were notorious for their arrogance and underhanded tactics, and Sarah doubted they'd play fair. Still, she refused to let fear dictate her actions. Instead, she channeled her energy into honing her skills and reinforcing the bond she shared with Titan and Blaze. Each day, the training sessions grew more intense. They practiced everything from basic obedience commands to complex tactical maneuvers, ensuring they were ready for whatever Razor might throw at them. Meanwhile, Razor and his crew seemed to revel in the attention. They strutted around town, boasting about how quickly they'd crushed Sarah and her pet project. At the local diner, they loudly speculated about what kind of stunts Sarah would try to pull off, laughing as if the outcome was already decided. She'll probably trip over her own feet before her dogs even get started, one biker joked, earning approving nods and chuckles from the others. But despite their bravado, there was an underlying unease among some members of the gang. A few had seen glimpses of Sarah's training sessions and weren't entirely convinced that this would be as easy a victory as Razor claimed. As the day of the challenge approached, Sarah finalized the details of the competition. With input from a few neutral townsfolk who volunteered to act as judges, she outlined a series of tasks designed to test both human and canine abilities. There would be physical challenges, such as navigating obstacle courses blindfolded while relying solely on verbal commands to guide the dogs. There would also be mental tests, including simulated scenarios where quick thinking and teamwork would be essential. The final task: subduing a mock threat without causing harm, a nod to the precision and restraint required in real-life tactical situations. Razor scoffed when he heard the rules, dismissing them as child's play. He insisted his crew didn't need fancy courses or simulations to prove their toughness. "We're not here to jump through hoops," he declared, flexing his tattooed arms for emphasis. "This is about showing who's boss. If she thinks her little show will impress us, she's got another thing coming." Despite his bluster, Razor agreed to the terms, confident that his intimidation tactics alone would be enough to rattle Sarah. On the morning of the challenge, anticipation buzzed through the air. Dozens of townspeople gathered at the edge of the forest where the makeshift arena had been set up. Wooden hurdles, tunnels, and climbing walls dotted the landscape, creating a course worthy of military-grade training. Spectators lined the perimeter, eager to see how things would unfold. Some cheered for Sarah, inspired by her quiet determination, while others jeered, siding with the Iron Reapers out of loyalty or fear. Even children perched on tree branches, wide-eyed and whispering bets about who would win. As Sarah arrived with Titan and Blaze trotting proudly beside her, the crowd fell silent. Her calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to Razor, who swaggered onto the field flanked by his crew. His leather jacket gleamed in the sunlight, and his boots kicked up dust as he strutted toward the starting line. For a moment, the two faced each other across the open space, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah took a deep breath, glancing down at her dogs. Titan's intelligent gaze met hers, steady and reassuring, while Blaze's ears twitched, alert and ready. She knew this wasn't just about winning. It was about proving that strength came in many forms, whether it was the quiet resolve of a handler guiding her dogs or the fierce loyalty of animals trained to protect. True power lay in trust and teamwork, and as the first whistle blew, signaling the start of the challenge, Sarah felt a surge of confidence. Whatever happened next, she and her dogs would face it together. Ask. Explain. The morning of the challenge dawned crisp and clear, the kind of day that seemed tailor-made for a showdown. Sarah rose before sunrise, her mind sharp and focused. She spent the early hours going over every detail of the competition in her head, visualizing each task, and rehearsing the commands she'd give Titan and Blaze. Her dogs, sensing her determination, were unusually alert, their eyes locked on her as if they understood the gravity of what lay ahead. Together, they ate a quick breakfast, Sarah keeping it light to stay agile, while Titan and Blaze devoured hearty portions of high-protein kibble to fuel their bodies for the demanding tasks. By the time they arrived at the makeshift arena, the atmosphere was electric. The crowd had grown larger than Sarah expected, with townsfolk lining the edges of the field and even climbing trees or perching on nearby fences to get a better view. Some held handmade signs cheering for Sarah, scrawled with phrases like "Go Team Callahan" and "Strength and Trust." Others whispered among themselves, skeptical about whether a woman and her dogs could hold their own against Razor and his crew. Despite the mix of support and doubt, Sarah remained unfazed. Her focus was singular, proving not just to Razor but to everyone watching that she and her dogs were a force to be reckoned with. Razor and his gang rolled in shortly after, their arrival announced by the deafening roar of their motorcycles. They'd parked in a loose semicircle near the starting line, revving their engines as if to intimidate anyone within earshot. Razor stepped off his bike with exaggerated confidence, his leather jacket creaking as he adjusted his gloves. He scanned the crowd, smirking when he caught sight of Sarah standing quietly beside Titan and Blaze. "You ready to embarrass yourself?" he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. His crew erupted into laughter, But Sarah didn't flinch. Instead, she gave Titan a reassuring pat and whispered something to Blaze, who wagged his tail in response. The first challenge was the obstacle course, blindfolded navigation. Sarah would have to rely entirely on verbal commands to guide her dogs through a series of hurdles, tunnels, and balance beams. As she tied the blindfold securely around her head, the murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Could she really do this without seeing? Razor sneered from the sidelines, clearly convinced she'd fail miserably. But Sarah blocked out the noise, trusting completely in her bond with Titan and Blaze. "Forward," she commanded calmly, her voice cutting through the chatter. Titan sprang into action, leading the way with precision. Blaze followed closely behind, his movements fluid and confident. Step by step, Sarah guided them through the course, her instructions clear and deliberate. When Titan reached a tunnel, she instructed him to crawl, and he obeyed instantly, disappearing into the narrow passage. Blaze waited patiently until she signaled, "Your turn," and then darted through with equal speed. The crowd gasped in awe as the dogs flawlessly executed each maneuver, their teamwork seamless. At one point, Sarah stumbled slightly on uneven ground, prompting a few snickers from Razor's crew. But Titan immediately slowed his pace, staying close to her side until she regained her footing. It was a small moment, yet profoundly symbolic, a reminder of the unbreakable connection between handler and dog. By the time they crossed the finish line, the audience erupted into applause, many clapping so hard their hands turned red. Even some of the skeptics couldn't hide their admiration. But Sarah wasn't done yet. After catching her breath, she moved on to the next challenge, a simulated hostage scenario. This time, she and her dogs had to locate and neutralize a hidden threat, played by a volunteer wearing padded gear, without causing harm. Razor watched intently, arms crossed, as Sarah issued rapid-fire commands. Titan sniffed the air, pinpointing the target's location almost instantly, while Blaze positioned himself strategically to block any escape routes. Within minutes, the duo had cornered the hostage-taker, barking sharply to signal victory. The judges nodded approvingly, impressed by the dog's restraint and precision. As the day wore on, Sarah pushed herself harder than ever, determined to leave no room for doubt. Between challenges, she encouraged Titan and Blaze with soft words and gentle pats, their tails wagging despite their exhaustion. Meanwhile, Razor grew increasingly agitated, pacing back and forth as he realized his initial mockery might come back to bite him. His crew began exchanging uneasy glances, their earlier bravado fading as Sarah continued to dominate. By the time the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the field, it was clear that Sarah and her dogs were unmatched in skill and discipline. As the final challenge approached, the tension in the air was palpable. The earlier tasks had already showcased Sarah's incredible bond with Titan and Blaze, leaving the crowd buzzing with excitement, and Razor visibly irritated. His usual swagger had dimmed, replaced by a simmering frustration that he couldn't quite hide. He paced near the sidelines, muttering under his breath while occasionally glaring at Sarah. For someone who thrived on dominance, watching her succeed was clearly eating away at him. The last test was designed to push both handlers and their teams to their limits, a high-stakes simulated ambush scenario. This wasn't just about physical skill or obedience. It required quick thinking, adaptability, and flawless communication between handler and dogs. Smoke bombs would be deployed mid-exercise to create confusion, mimicking real-world conditions where visibility was compromised. The goal was simple yet daunting: neutralize the threat without causing harm, all while navigating chaos. When the rules were explained, Razor scoffed loudly, trying to mask his unease with bravado. "Smoke? Really?" He jeered, shaking his head, as if the whole thing was absurd. "What's next? Fireworks? You think your little show dogs can handle this?" His crew laughed nervously, though their confidence seemed shaky after witnessing Sarah's earlier performances. Sarah, however, didn't rise to the bait. She simply nodded at the judges, signaling she understood the task, then turned her attention to Titan and Blaze. "Ready, boys?" she asked softly, kneeling down to meet their eyes. Both dogs responded instantly, their tails wagging with determination. They knew what was expected of them, and they were ready to deliver. As Sarah took her position at the starting line, the crowd fell silent, anticipation hanging heavy in the crisp evening air. Even Razor stopped pacing for a moment, his arms crossed tightly over his chest as he watched. The whistle blew, and the exercise began. At first, everything went smoothly. Titan led the way, his nose scanning for scents that might indicate danger, while Blaze stayed close to Sarah, guarding her flank. Their movements were fluid, almost choreographed, as they navigated the course with precision. But then, just as they reached the halfway point, the smoke bombs detonated, filling the area with thick gray clouds that obscured vision and muffled sound. For a moment, confusion reigned. The crowd gasped, unsure of what was happening behind the curtain of smoke. Some of Razor's crew shouted taunts, convinced the sudden disruption would throw Sarah off balance. But Sarah remained calm, her voice cutting through the haze like a beacon. "Titan, find. Blaze, cover," she commanded firmly. Her words carried authority, and her dogs responded without hesitation. Titan darted forward, using his keen sense of smell to locate the hidden threat, while Blaze positioned himself strategically, ensuring Sarah was protected from any surprise attacks. Inside the smoke, panic could have easily set in, but not for Sarah and her team. Years of military training had prepared them for moments like this, when clarity came not from sight, but from trust and instinct. Titan barked sharply, signaling he'd found the target. Sarah moved swiftly toward the sound, her hand resting lightly on Blaze's back for guidance. When she reached the volunteer playing the role of the threat, she raised her arm in a clear signal. "Hold," she ordered, her tone leaving no room for argument. Titan froze in place, his teeth bared in a low growl, while Blaze stood firm, blocking any escape route. Just as quickly as it had begun, the smoke cleared, revealing the scene to the stunned audience. There stood Sarah, flanked by her dogs, completely in control. The volunteer raised his hands in mock surrender, nodding to confirm the task was complete. The crowd erupted into cheers, clapping and whistling in awe. Even some of Razor's own crew looked impressed, murmuring among themselves about how smooth and efficient the operation had been. Razor, however, wasn't ready to concede defeat. Not yet. Frustrated and humiliated, he stormed onto the field, shouting accusations of unfairness. "This is ridiculous," he spat, pointing at Sarah. She had help. No one can do that blind. Before anyone could react, he lunged toward Sarah, his fists clenched. But before he could take another step, Blaze sprang into action. In an instant, the Belgian Malinois pinned Razor to the ground with a low, menacing growl, his teeth inches from the biker's face. The crowd froze, holding its breath. Sarah stepped forward, her voice calm but commanding. "Blaze, hold." Razor struggled briefly, but the dog's grip was firm, unyielding. Finally, realizing there was no way out, Razor stammered, Okay, call him off." Sarah gave a single command, "Release," and Blaze backed off immediately, returning to her side with perfect discipline. The aftermath of Blaze's takedown left the entire crowd in stunned silence. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Razor stood frozen, his usual arrogance replaced by a mix of shock and embarrassment. His face flushed red as he straightened his jacket, trying, and failing, to regain some semblance of dignity. The Iron Reapers shifted uncomfortably on the sidelines, their earlier jeers now replaced by awkward muttering. Some exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to react to what had just unfolded. Even the most skeptical townsfolk couldn't hide their amazement. Sarah and her dogs had proven themselves beyond any doubt. Sarah knelt beside Blaze, giving him a gentle pat on the head. "Good boy," she murmured, her voice calm but firm. Titan sat nearby, alert and watchful, his eyes never leaving Razor. Despite the tension, Sarah didn't gloat or taunt. Instead, she turned to the biker leader with quiet authority. "You wanted proof," she said evenly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Now you've seen it." Razor opened his mouth to retort, but nothing came out. He clenched his jaw, his hands balling into fists at his sides. For all his bluster and bravado, he was cornered, not physically, but emotionally. The man who prided himself on being untouchable had been humbled, not by brute force, but by skill, discipline, and teamwork. It was a lesson he hadn't expected to learn that day. As the reality sank in, the crowd began to stir. At first, there were scattered claps, hesitant but growing louder. Then someone shouted, "That's how it's done," followed by another cheer. "Way to go, Callahan." Soon, the entire field erupted in applause, the sound echoing through the trees. Children jumped up and down, pointing excitedly at Titan and Blaze, while adults nodded approvingly. Even a few members of the Iron Reapers joined in reluctantly, their respect for Sarah begrudging but undeniable. But Sarah wasn't focused on the cheering or Razor's humiliation. She crouched down again, speaking softly to her dogs. "You did amazing today," she told them, running her fingers through their fur. Both Titan and Blade wagged their tails, their bodies relaxing now that the challenge was over. They had trained for years for moments like this, and they had performed flawlessly. Sarah felt a deep sense of pride, not just in herself, but in the bond they shared. These weren't just animals. They were partners, friends, and family. Together, they had faced adversity and emerged victorious. Razor finally managed to compose himself enough to speak. "Fine," he muttered, avoiding direct eye contact with Sarah. "You won. Happy now?" His tone was bitter, but there was a hint of grudging respect beneath the surface. He gestured to his crew, signaling it was time to leave. As they mounted their bikes and revved their engines, the noise seemed less intimidating than before, more like an attempt to save face than a show of power. One by one, they rode off, disappearing down the dirt road in a cloud of dust. When they were gone, the crowd lingered, buzzing with excitement. People approached Sarah, offering congratulations and heartfelt thanks. A young boy shyly asked if he could pet Titan, and Sarah smiled, nodding her permission. As the child tentatively reached out, Titan lowered his head, letting the boy scratch behind his ears. "He's so cool," the kid whispered, awestruck. Sarah chuckled softly. "He sure is," she replied. Despite the victory, Sarah knew this wasn't about revenge or proving superiority. It was about standing up for herself and showing others that strength comes in many forms. Whether it was the courage to face bullies, the patience to train a dog, or the resilience to rise above challenges, true power lay in character, not intimidation. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Sarah gathered her gear and prepared to head home. Titan and Blaze trotted happily beside her, their energy still high despite the long day. She glanced back at the field one last time, taking in the scene, the smiling faces, the lingering chatter, the sense of unity that hadn't existed before. For the first time since returning to town, Sarah felt like she belonged. Though Razor and his gang had slunk away defeated, Sarah knew this wasn't the end. There would always be people who underestimated her, who doubted her abilities because of her gender or her choice of companions. But she also knew something else. She didn't need to prove herself to everyone. What mattered most was staying true to who she was, and knowing that her dogs would always have her back, no matter what. By the time Sarah reached her cabin, the adrenaline of the day had begun to ebb away, leaving behind a quiet sense of satisfaction. The sun had long since set, casting the forest in a soft silver glow under the moonlight. Titan and Blaze padded silently beside her, their steps slower now but still full of pride. They seemed to know they'd done something extraordinary, not just for themselves, but for Sarah too. As she opened the cabin door and stepped inside, The warmth of the small space enveloped her like an old friend. Sarah lit a lantern, its golden light flickering against the wooden walls. She sank onto the couch, letting out a deep breath as she reflected on everything that had happened. The challenges, Razor's mockery, the crowd's cheers. It all felt surreal now, as if it belonged to someone else's story. But what stood out most was the unshakable bond she shared with Titan and Blaze. Through every obstacle, every moment of doubt, they had been her foundation. And today, they had reminded her, and everyone else, that true strength wasn't about domination or fear. It was about trust, teamwork, and heart. The next morning brought a different kind of energy to the town. News of Sarah's victory spread even further, reaching people who hadn't been there to witness it firsthand. Neighbors stopped by her cabin to thank her, not just for standing up to the Iron Reapers, but for inspiring them. "You showed us what real courage looks like," one elderly woman said, tears glistening in her eyes. Others shared stories of how they'd felt powerless against Razor's gang for years, too afraid to speak up. Seeing Sarah face him head-on gave them hope, a reminder that sometimes taking a stand could spark change. Even some members of the Iron Reapers approached Sarah later that week, though cautiously. A younger biker named Jace came by her cabin one evening, his hands shoved awkwardly into his pockets. "Look, wanted to say thanks," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. When Sarah raised an eyebrow, he explained, "Razor's always acted like we gotta scare people to earn respect. But after watching you and your dogs, well, it made me think maybe there's another way." Sarah nodded slowly, recognizing the sincerity in his words. "Respect isn't given because you demand it," she replied. "It's earned when you prove you're worth it." Word eventually reached Sarah that Razor and his crew had started laying low, no longer harassing townsfolk or revving their bikes late at night. Whether it was out of shame, fear, or genuine reflection, no one knew for sure, and Sarah didn't dwell on it. What mattered was that the atmosphere in the town had shifted. People walked taller, spoke louder, and smiled more freely. For the first time in years, the streets felt safer, the air lighter. As weeks turned into months, Sarah settled deeper into her new routine. She continued training Titan and Blaze, setting up courses in the fields and exploring the woods during long hikes. Sometimes, curious kids from town would tag along, eager to learn about K9 handling. Sarah welcomed them warmly, teaching them basic commands and sharing stories of her military missions. Watching their eyes light up with wonder reminded her why she loved this work so much. It wasn't just about skill, it was about connection. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Sarah sat on the porch with Titan sprawled at her feet and Blaze resting his chin on her knee, she realized something important. Coming back to this town hadn't been about escaping her past or finding peace. It had been about rediscovering herself. The challenges she faced weren't meant to break her. They were opportunities to grow stronger, to remind herself of who she was and what she stood for. And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet beauty of nature and the unwavering loyalty of her dogs, Sarah felt truly at home. She didn't need applause or recognition to validate her journey. All she needed was the knowledge that she had stayed true to herself, and that Titan and Blaze would always be by her side, ready for whatever came next. For Sarah Callahan, life wasn't about avoiding storms. It was about learning to dance in the rain and teaching others to do the same.